Our guests today are the hosts of the Thinking Beyond podcast, David Flint and Joan Quintana. Welcome to the show.
Howdy.
Howdy.
It's great to have you here. Thanks for joining us.
Yeah, good to be here.
We've had a few laughs already. I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, well, that happens on our podcasts from time to time.
All the time. All the time.
Indeed. So we'll start with our icebreaker question for the both of you. What is your favorite superpower?
Being able to accurately predict the financial markets.
That's a good one.
Yeah. Oh, can you imagine how much money you could make if you could do that?
Yes. Yes, I can imagine.
Yeah.
I've run it on Excel spreadsheets.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. You could buy all the rest of the superpowers with that.
You could buy Batman for sure. How much money do you think it would take to make someone Superman, for example?
Oh.
Like how much would you have to spend to do that?
Oh my goodness. I don't know. I've never tried to calculate it. But I'm assuming that, if you had like $1 trillion, you could probably get close.
Yeah. You probably could.
What was it? The $100 million man? The $1 million man?
$6 million.
$6 million.
Yeah, back in the 1970s. Adjusted dollars.
That's when $6 million was something.
Yeah.
Your favorite superpower?
I think I'm going to say mind reading. If you could just read people's minds and understand even better than they do what they actually want, that'd be so super powerful.
So not telepathy in that you can talk and listen, but just being able to listen?
Yeah.
Okay. Would you want to hear them or see them? Would you want to hear their thoughts or see their thoughts?
Yes.
Both.
Yes.
So you could choose.
This is a multimedia world.
Sure.
Yeah.
Why not?
So why not? Let's go all in.
Would you want to hear them in their own voice or would you want to hear them in like a Siri voice?
Oh, please. Their own voice. Because you have to, the inflection and everything, you got to get all the subtleties, right?
If I could make it like always in an Australian accent, I might pick that.
No. Because Australians have a distinct personality, right? And not everybody in the world has that personality.
That's true. But just hearing, like, I like an Australian accent. I think it's the best accent. And if it could be in their personality with an Australian accent, but not the creepy Siri Australian accent.
I've actually not even tried. I've not tried changing Siri.
I did try changing Siri and it didn't work out.
Wasn't for me.
For this reason. The voice sounded great. I was like, oh, you're talking to me in Australian accent. This is exactly what I wanted. But then I realized when you ask questions of Siri or tell Siri to do things, you also have to use an Australian accent. Or otherwise she's like, I'm sorry, Ben, I didn't get that.
I didn't know that. Okay.
Yes.
Well, thank you for saving me some time on that experiment.
So are you going to see this like in cartoon bubbles around people's heads, or because you said you
on your visual days?
How could this go? Cartoon bubbles might work. How will it be? It'll be something like a Google Glasses, only maybe like plugged into my brain, so I get it right away.
So you get like a HUD.
Man, like what are they actually thinking right now?
Right.
Because wouldn't that be productive?
Right.
Imagine in marriage. Whew, this would save so much time and heartache. What do you really mean?
Yes. Right.
And I'm saying that as a woman. Man, I think you men would be so well served by this.
We absolutely would.
I say that as guilty as charged. Mixed message sender occasionally.
I am very fortunate in that my wife doesn't do a whole lot with the mixed messages. If she wants me to want to do the dishes, she will say, I want you to want to do the dishes. But
that is awesome.
Yes. But actually,
she has a superpower.
She does. She has so many superpowers. The most important of which is she can put up with me, because I'm not always easy to deal with. I try to be, but I guess we all try. We all have our imperfections. How did you two meet?
My husband introduced us, right?
Yeah, we met several times when I was around Jose, and he would say, oh, and do you remember my wife, Joan? And I would say, yes, you introduced us. And then the next time he would say, oh, and have you met my wife, Joan? And I would say, well, yes, you introduced us. And that happened, I don't know how many times.
That is Jose's very kind way of making sure that I'm reminded that I've met this person before. Because we meet a lot of people, and that aspect of things is not my gift, really, honestly. Like, I really remember people when we have something more than a really superficial conversation. I have a lot of really superficial conversations, and it doesn't stick. And so this is Jose being kind to his wife, saying,
Okay.
It's a clue to me that we've met before, and I should say, so good to see you instead of nice to meet you, which is always so awkward when you get that wrong.
In LA, everybody says that all the time anyway, even if you haven't met before.
Right. Well, that's the Southern grace too. Like you should always say, oh, it's so nice to know you. So nice to know you. That's like the nice sort of middle ground.
That's a good one.
I know you now.
I might use that.
It's good.
So wait, so he says, have you met my wife, Joan? And then that means that to you, that's code that you have met this person before?
Yeah, something like that. Yeah.
Does
something about the way you said that keyed into me that we have a little code.
Well, it gives me the opportunity, or it gave me the opportunity to say, well, yes, you have introduced us before.
Okay. So does the person ever say
drink
no?
Some more coffee.
I mean, please. I'm right there with you.
Hard conversation already.
But I don't know, when we first met, it was, I don't know, at least 2 years before we started working together. But we started working together kind of in January, February of 2017, right? Because the book came out in 2018, and we were working on it for over a year.
I feel like it was around 2016, early 2016, but or maybe that's when we talked first. I don't remember. I'm really bad about piecing the past together, but I remember when we met because we were in our gallery. Well, it wasn't when we met, but it was when we first started actually talking about things that are on David's mind. And there's a lot of good stuff going on in that head. So we started talking about some great ideas that he has, and we were in the gallery. Like, this must have been an important conversation for me because I remember it visually, and I only remember the important things visually. The rest of them are like, so this must have been important. I remember we were sitting in the library portion of the gallery talking. It was probably a gallery opening or something.
How do you, if you don't remember it, things that you don't remember visually, how do you remember them? Do you remember it's like a written story in your head?
It's
or
like a bullet point. But if there's like a visual memory there, then, that was important.
So then in terms of like classroom learning styles, so you're not a visual learner or you are a visual learner?
Yeah, it depends on the material.
Oh, okay. Fascinating.
Yeah.
Okay. David, I noticed you're a clinical professor. Yeah. Tim Dye, our award-winning investments expert in the MBA program, is also a clinical professor. So I've had good experience with clinical professors before. What led you to prefer this type of professorship?
When I did my doctoral work here at A&M in the early 90s, I understood that, I had to do research and things like that to get the doctorate.
Right.
But it became apparent to me during the doctoral program that while I understand and appreciate research and can do it if I'm interested, I didn't want that to be the focus of my life. So I actually did not intend on becoming an academic and having a career in academia. I had already been involved in entrepreneurship back in Arizona where I grew up, was an owner in a software company back in Scottsdale, Arizona. And so when I finished the doctoral program, I just went back there and got pulled into academia by accident. So I've always been focused on the teaching and practice rather than on the research. So it made a lot of sense to take a clinical position here when that was offered to me. But before here, I actually was in Utah for 5 years at a university named Utah Valley University that most people don't know about, even though it's huge, because it's young. And there I was on tenure track. I was I guess I was about to go up for tenure about the time that this position opened up at A&M, and I came back. Yeah.
So tenure track, you were doing research then?
Yeah. Yeah. Now that was a teaching focused institution. So the research requirements are very different than at a tier 1 research university.
I see. And you said the university is fairly young. What is, in university years, what is young?
When I went up there in 2003, it had only been a bachelor's degree granting institution for under a decade,
Wow.
I think.
Okay, that is.
And the business school there was going for its first AACSB accreditation, which is part of the reason that I was attracted to going there, because I could be very involved in sort of setting the groundwork for that business school.
It's fascinating stuff. If we think about, colleges, universities, institutions of higher learning, for the most part, they're pretty old. Like they've been around for, 100 years is kind of when you can say, okay, we're here to stay.
Yeah.
So that's the idea of starting an accredited institution of higher learning. I can't even fathom how much work that would take and how much time it would take.
It's got an interesting history. It started out as a technical school after World War II, and at some point it turned into a junior college type institution, 2-year degree sort of thing.
Sure.
And then eventually the state of Utah realized that the population growth and the demand for higher education there was so great in that area that it needed to become a full 4-year institution. And right as I left in 2008 to come here at A&M, it switched to being a master's granting institution. And there was a name change.
Okay.
When I was there, it was called Utah Valley State College, and now it's called Utah Valley University.
Is there a difference between a college and a university in a denotational sense?
I don't know that there is a strict definitional line there, but generally institutions that grant graduate degrees will have that university name on it.
Okay.
Plus, colleges tend to be more limited in the number of subjects that they offer than universities.
I see. Joan, tell us your story.
So I think you're aware of this, but I studied journalism here at A&M, class of 92. And I actually, as an undergrad, I decided to focus more on the technology side of things. And it's hard for me to even remember now why, but I was just intrigued. So I took computer programming classes and surveyed some courses in engineering and just was really, really interested in that side of things. So technical journalism ended up being what I ended up with. And it was just such a fantastic foundation for being able to learn from people and go into this world of technology commercialization and startups and entrepreneurship. And so I went up through the ranks, kind of cut my teeth, if you will, at TTI, the Transportation Institute, which is a phenomenal institution on this campus and globally. And got to work with a bunch of really smart people, and that led me broader into the College of Engineering. I have lots of friends there, and did a little stint at the Association of Former Students as their director of communications, which was a whole lot of fun.
Right.
But my heart is in this entrepreneurial space and working with people who are starting something new or kind of just working in that small business environment. And so I focus more on the marketing communication side, but have increasingly over the last 15 years really worked in business strategy. I really come at that from the perspective that you can't separate the two. And so Seed Gallery and Advent GX and all of that is really centered around economic development, with the emphasis being on supporting entrepreneurs, because they're the engine, right? They're all the motors that keep our economy going. So we really focus on that. And David's an entrepreneur. That's how I looked at the opportunity to work with him from the very beginning and I write. So I'm a writer, among other things. And so as a writer, and a storyteller, whether that's about some high-tech thing that's on the side of the highway or a new technology or a new business or even a not-for-profit, helping them tell their stories in a way that enhances their business strategy is what I like to focus on. And this guy here has some really cool tools that he's developed to help people do that more effectively.
Yes, indeed. So you've kind of already answered the question then, but for your part, how did your previous experiences inspire thinking beyond your podcast?
Well, thinking beyond the podcast is just the outgrowth of everything else that I've been involved in. Got involved in the software industry back in the early 1980s, back when personal computers were still kind of toys and people were trying to figure out how to do business applications with them.
Right.
And that was my first entrepreneurial exposure. I didn't actually start the company, but I was in very soon after it started, and I became one of the owners. And over time, I became one of the key people in the company. Stayed with that company all the way through 2014. It was all the way until 2014 until I finally sold out my last interest in the company.
Okay.
So over 30 years with that business. But that business led to businesses in real estate and then some insurance and some logistic tech and all that kind of stuff. And then doing some not-for-profit stuff along the way as well. You know, when you start doing things, usually other doors start opening for you.
That's the truth.
Because you develop relationships and connections. And if you're kind of successful over there, people say, hey, come over here and play in this sandbox too. So I was involved in the business world and the not-for-profit world. And as I said, I didn't intend on being an academic. But when I went back to Arizona, after being here in the early 90s working on the doctorate, some faculty members who had been part of the business school, and it wasn't named the Mays Business School then, it was just the business school, had moved to the Arizona State University system. And they called me up and asked if I would like to just do some adjunct teaching. And I started doing that in the Arizona State system on the West Campus. And then it became, can we get you full time? And I said, I don't really want the research academic. And they said, what if you just taught for us? And I said, well, that could be fun. So I started doing that. And so I've always been involved in practice, both for-profit, not-for-profit. And then I got pulled back in to the teaching side of things.
Right.
So all of that is leading up to this podcast in the sense that all of that background created the VReal framework that I use when I'm trying to help people think strategically. And that led to the book, and then the book led to the podcast.
So what was the moment where you two said, let's work together?
Again, I think it was like in January of 2017, I think.
Right. But I mean, in terms of like, how did we know we were going to work together?
Right. What was the,
That's that mind reading thing.
Right. Was there a particular thing or a particular incident that made you say, oh, you know what? This is a fit. Let's move this.
Right.
Let's move this forward.
I can answer from my perspective.
Okay. You answer from your perspective.
Because I don't know if we had a real conversation about this, but so David had talked about the fact that he had some ideas and people had been prompting him, oh, you should write a book, you should write a book. And for a number of reasons that hadn't happened yet. And so we sat down and talked about the ideas that he has.
This was for the book.
Well, this was just ideas.
Okay.
There's more than one potential
exactly. There's
book there.
more.
But anyway.
Yeah. Okay.
There's a lot going on in there.
Yeah.
So we sat down and just talked about some different things that had been on his mind. And he's been just some tools, some ways of thinking that he's developed over many years as a consultant and as an educator. And I took copious notes because I was really trying to understand. And even as I was trying to understand, I was trying to evaluate, okay, market potential. What do we have here? Audiences,
Sure.
practicality, like, is this something that can work?
Shaping.
And so I think I knew we were at Harvest, actually. Mm-hmm. Again, one of those visual memories. We were at Harvest, and he described, among other things, he described the VReal framework. And it just was very clear to me, okay, this is something that is indeed very valuable, potentially very valuable. Mm-hmm. And of course, there's a lot that goes into creating that value and making it work, and people have to know about it. So it's challenging, but I knew right away because I work with a lot of companies, a lot of startups, a lot of entrepreneurs, a lot of individuals, young people that I mentor, that the need exists in some really big ways for people to be able to just really evaluate what they have to work with in terms of resources and capabilities, and then be able to create a strategy around that can actually work over time in a market. So whether you're an individual trying to find a job or start a new career, or you're a startup company or you're an existing organization, there is a real need to be able to think strategically. And this is very well documented out in the research, that people struggle with this thing called strategy, and they're not really don't know how to do it very well or very effectively. They don't want to work on strategy. They're not really thinking critically in an effective way.
And the funny thing about that is everybody thinks they're a strategist.
I don't find that. That's
Nope.
not my experience. So but maybe that's because I do strategy.
Okay.
I'm a consultant, but most people I talk to, most of my clients, they're just like, I don't know what to do. Hands up in the air, like, I'm done. Like, I don't know how to go at this. They sort of acknowledge either one of two things: either they're too close to it, right?
Okay.
So they just need help, or two, they don't even know how to begin to think strategically about whatever it is they're trying to work on.
Okay.
And so I come across that, routinely, daily. That people, they acknowledge this is not my bailiwick. I'm not a strategic thinker. And so VReal is a tool to help people learn to think more strategically in a very simple way. It's so, and VReal is really sticky. So once you understand it, and you sort of get the language, it changes how you think.
Okay. So what is the purpose of Thinking Beyond?
The podcast, the genesis of the podcast is the book. We want people to hear stories about how people are thinking strategically in whatever context that is. Mm-hmm. And of course, we always try and help them think in a VReal sort of way, whether or not they've had much exposure to that or not.
Okay.
The purpose of Thinking Beyond the podcast is really to provide listeners with some stories they can learn from. So it's always valuable when you can learn from other people's experiences and maybe not make the same mistakes other people make.
Oh, okay.
I need to make my own mistakes. How God made me, I think, but it really is valuable, and it's inspiring when you can hear, especially maybe as an entrepreneur, when you can hear from somebody who's a little bit further down the path than you are, who's already struggled with perhaps failing to think things through and overcoming that, whether or not they did so with VReal, is really, really valuable. And it's just inspiring to know that there's somebody, obviously there's a lot of people out there who are ahead of you, or maybe there are people who are right where you are struggling with something. But conversations with strategic thinkers, many of the people on the podcast are strategic thinkers. Many of them many of them actually had to learn to think strategically. And VReal has played a big role in that for them. So VReal's been around for a number of years.
Yeah, I first started talking about it probably about 20 years ago now.
Okay. Mm-hmm. So you described hearing about people's mistakes that they're making in thinking strategically. What are the most common of those? I think entrepreneurs, for the most part, consider themselves to be pretty smart people. But are there any recurring themes that you keep running into, stuff that you maybe even steer your guests away from at this point, just because you've done it so many times? What are the most common things that come up on the show in terms of teaching people to think strategically?
For the budding entrepreneurs out there, it's falling so in love with your idea that you don't do your homework around that idea.
Okay.
People in the entrepreneurship world talk about it being your baby,
right?
And you don't see the flaws in your baby,
right?
That's probably the biggest issue for entrepreneurs. For people who are running organizations in general, whether for profit or not for profit, it's not thinking enough in the full context of what they're doing.
Okay.
And the VREAL framework prompts them to think in that full context. They get into habits. They get sort of tunnel vision at times.
I was going to say that same word. It sounds like in both cases, you're dealing with a little bit of tunnel vision.
Yeah. But the flair of it is different.
Right, right. So when you talk about doing your homework then for the entrepreneurial side, does that involve market research? What else does it involve?
Well, actually, this drops right into the VREAL framework. Okay, you always start with thinking about how you're creating value. And that means you have to know your market. You have to know who your customers are. You have to know what they consider to be value. It's in their head, not your head. So you got to get out of your head and get into theirs. So that's where you always start, is understanding your customer base, understanding your market, how you actually are creating value. But then, and this comes out of the resource-based view of the firm, which is a big academic area in strategic management, you have to consider all the resources and capabilities that go into actually creating that value. And once again, this is something where people may not do enough thinking about all of the resources and capabilities that must come together in order to do that. The second thing then is the R, which stands for rareness, or rarity, if you want to use that word. It's not enough to create value. You have to do it in a way that has some degree of rareness to it.
Right.
If you don't, then you're going to be at parity with everybody else in the marketplace who can create that same sort of value in the same way.
And parity is the enemy of rarity.
Yes, it is. I have a former student of mine who's an entrepreneur, multiple businesses that he's dealing with these days, and he likes to say parity is poverty.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So understanding, some degree of rareness and how you can have that and what really makes you rare in that bundle of competencies that you're developing through your resources and capabilities is step 2. And if you don't have some degree of rareness, stop, start over.
Keep thinking.
Yeah, keep thinking. But then going beyond that, you have to think about the eroding factors that are going to come in and work against your value creation and your rareness.
Right.
And then you have to think about the enabling factors that are going to allow you to blunt or stop eroding factors and support your value creation and your rareness. And you have to prioritize all of that, because obviously not everything that can hurt you is as important, so what's at the top of the list?
Right.
And the same thing with enabling factors, what floats to the top of the list of the key enablers that you got to put in place.
Right. So eroding factors and enabling factors are kind of like the derivatives of strength and opportunity versus weakness and threat. It's combining the internal and external aspects of those and looking at the changes in them.
There is that aspect to it.
Okay.
But I like to use the terms eroding and enabling,
right,
because I think that focuses people's attention better on what they really need to think about.
Okay.
If you do a typical SWOT exercise with people, they often come up with all kinds of things that they consider to be strengths or weaknesses or opportunities and threats without necessarily a really clear, sharp focus as to why. I'm trying to get people to focus on very specific things.
Okay.
This is going to erode my value creation. This is going to erode my rareness. This is going to enable me to stop this eroding factor. This is going to enable me to maintain a degree of rareness. Those kinds of very sharp, focused ways of thinking.
So it's more an assessment in terms of it's not observational, it's more actional. Like, these are the things that I need to take action on. Like, what sets apart the eroding and enabling factors from the broad perspective of a typical SWOT analysis, as you say?
Again, trying to get that focused and trying to get prioritization so that people go,
that makes sense.
Okay, this is what I need to do first. Because what I want to do, and by the way, let's just throw the L in there at the end.
Oh, yes.
The idea is, how long do I have? How long do I have before eroding factors hit? How long do I have to get enablers in place? How long do I have to potentially earn that competitive advantage in the marketplace? Or how long until I can remove incompetencies and get at least back to parity? I mean, I want that idea of dynamism and change to be in people's heads as they're thinking about this as well.
Right. Because
that's the world that we live in. And the snapshot of today has to be thought of in the context of the changes of tomorrow.
Okay.
So, at the end of doing a really good, thorough VREAL framework sort of way of thinking, the hope is that you can say, I need to do this, and this is why. And have a good sort of strategic kernel of a plan in place.
Right. And when you say, I need to do this and this is why, do you encourage them to think, like Jim Collins talks about thinking in terms of your like profit per X? What is X? Find your X. Is there a really specific way that you frame that I need to do this and this is why? Or no?
No, I think it's more just the way that I said it there. You know, when people have a good, strong awareness that, hey, at the top of my list of things I need to do is this, and I can tell you why. Because this is going to stop an eroding factor, or this is going to give me some rareness, or this is going to be a key enabler that I have to get in place. I'm happy. Right? Because now people have some sort of a path forward with some sort of justification for it, and they're not just winging it.
Right. What's been the best moment in terms of like either seeing the light bulb come on in somebody's mind or seeing them execute something that you find really compelling that's going to make the world better or make someone's life better? What have been your best moments in implementing this framework?
There's so many. I think that I'm really most excited, maybe not most excited, but I'm pretty excited about how not-for-profits are employing the VREAL framework. Typically, when you have leaders in the not-for-profit world, they don't have a big business background, right? So maybe they haven't been to business school.
Right.
They haven't had the benefit of classes in strategic management or that sort of thing. They're probably, if they've risen to the CEO level, they're probably pretty sharp, right? But they still need to be able to build sound strategy and, very importantly, get their teams and their donors and their volunteers on the same page, which is important no matter what you're doing. But in the not-for-profit world, it's especially important because resources are super limited, and volunteer burnout can be a real thing, and donor burnout can be a real thing. There's lots of competition for those things. So it's been really exciting to see some of our friends in the not-for-profit space not just start thinking with VREAL, but I mean, really own it, like in really surprising ways. So the example that comes to mind, I know David knows exactly what I'm going to say right now, is there's an organization called Voices for Children, and we worked a fair amount with the local Voices for Children of the Brazos Valley, which provides court-appointed special advocates, volunteers for kids in the foster care system. Oh. So you talk about life-changing, right? This is important stuff, right? Sure. These are some of the most vulnerable people in our communities, right? Are these kids that are, for whatever reason, have found themselves in the foster care system. And the goal of a CASA, a court-appointed special advocate, is to advocate for the child. But the assumption is that the best case is to get that family back together. If we can, let's get that family back together. And so literally a 1-day strategic planning workshop where VREAL was the framework we used with a staff of 12, so it's a very small organization, has resulted in this team using VREAL at so many levels of the organization that it's just so powerful. So one of the things about VREAL that's powerful is the language is super simple, right?
Yes.
a 5-minute conversation and you get it, right? You can start using this terminology to communicate more effectively with your colleagues or what have you. So that's one of the things that immediately attracted me to it is communication can be so difficult unless you have enough genius to simplify it. And if you can simplify communication so that it actually happens, you're really changing the world for the better. And so VREL does that in the most powerful but simple way. So for this staff of 12, they started using VREL not only to set the strategy, and AJ Reynolds, who is the CEO, I don't know what her director. She's an extremely strategic thinker, just naturally gifted in this way. Uh-huh. But her staff are people who are probably, in the social work space, right?
Sure.
And so what they're doing now with VREL is internally inside their organization, they're kind of looking at one another on the team, and they're sort of VRELing themselves to see how are each team member, how are they unique? How are they rare among the team, so that they can sort of determine how to best contribute to this team dynamic in the organization. But then they're also taking it all the way down to the family level. And they're using this language to talk to families and help them understand that mom and dad, if mom and dad are both in the picture, are by definition valuable and rare. But there are eroding factors that can be so big that can destroy that value completely. It can destroy the ability for mom and dad to be the mom and dad they want to be, right? But then you can put enablers in place to defend against that erosion. Maybe that's education. Maybe that's some sort of a treatment plan, some kind of an intervention. So you can put an enabler in place to defend against those eroding factors. And then you can think about how long is it going to take? Longevity. How long is it going to take to get those enablers completed so that erosion is arrested and mom and dad are able to be valuable and rare? And the amazing thing is this is suddenly not emotional, right? It's objective. And if ever you need something objective, it's when somebody's sitting across the table from you and saying, I can't give you your child today, right? This is powerful stuff. Yeah. But let's talk about what we can do to change that so we can put your family back together. So when I found out that literally the day after we had our one-day workshop, AJ gets an email from one of her advocate trainers saying, can I use VREL in my role? And AJ was like, yeah, if you think it's effective. Mm-hmm. And so we're in the process now of helping them refine how they're doing that. But talk about changing lives. This is powerful stuff, right? This is really powerful stuff. And you don't think about, well, I didn't. Now we do. Because we've had a couple people bring this to our attention. Right. We weren't thinking about VREL as a tool for families. But this is not the case. This is not unique. We've had another user group say, oh yeah, we use VREL with our kids. We use it with our family, because you have to make strategic decisions about resource allocation, and every child's unique and rare. And how do you decide if you're going to get a new water heater or a new roof or spend those resources, and how long do we have before we really have to make that decision? So I think one of the things that's so powerful about VREL is it really does allow for an objective conversation about something that could be emotional. And for entrepreneurs, it's always emotional. It just is, because it's their baby, right? And they're always excited about this product or service or whatever they're bringing to market. And so if you can help them think about, okay, think beyond value, think beyond the value proposition, because some entrepreneurs actually struggle to put together a sound value proposition. Mm-hmm. But if they can do that, then the likelihood that they're maybe a little too in love with their idea is pretty high. So we get them to think beyond that. Okay, so what's going to happen? Because something's going to happen. So what's going to happen? And thinking through that, we get a lot of deer in the headlights kind of things going like, but it's okay. You should think about what's going to happen, because next we're going to think about what you can do about it. And then we're going to put this all in the context of time. Like, okay, longevity. And so what happens is you start with this big, long list of sort of possibilities or resources and capabilities.
Right.
And going through this process of V-Roll, you end up with focus, a few things that you need to focus on in order to actually deliver on that value proposition.
So it sounds like in every case, whether you're talking about someone's metaphorical child or someone's literal child, what it's really about, and this was, I think, a word you used earlier, it's really about prioritization. It's about where do we need to spend the most of our time. Is that right?
Right. And that's strategy, right?
Sure. Yeah.
Or sometimes, in all fairness, it is, we need to stop and start over.
Right.
And go in a different direction.
We need a new plan. And that's a great thing, by the way, especially as an entrepreneur, or even in the case of a child who's been taken out of a home. Sometimes you have to go a different path, right?
Is there ever a stopping of certain things without starting over? Like Jim Collins talks about the stop doing list.
Sure. Yeah. I hope by thinking about eroding and enabling factors and longevity, you can identify things that you go, okay, we need to stop this or we need to start that or whatever without necessarily starting completely over. Sure. Absolutely.
Right. So you both wear, as is obvious to our listeners by now, you both wear a ton of hats. Tell us about the gallery. I get invites from my friend Valerie all the time.
So Seed Gallery.
Shout out to Valerie.
Seed is spelled SEAD, so it's spelled wrong, but it's right for us. It's science, engineering, art, and design. And so I mentioned earlier that our company, AdventGX, is a community and economic development company. And Seed Gallery is really a project of our company.
Okay.
And we put it in place in Bryan because we noted that in Bryan at the time, there was no dedicated gallery space. And the city of Bryan was looking to apply for, and we were supporting them applying for this cultural arts district designation, which is a great thing for a community, strategically speaking, because then the state of Texas actually does some marketing for you, which is great, leveraging of resources, right? So we were working on that. And at the same time, Jose and I had gotten involved in the International Network for Science, Engineering, Art, and Design, which is really just about encouraging and fostering innovation by getting people from all of those different disciplines to go together and talk about creative solutions to hard problems. And so Seed Gallery is both a traditional art gallery, fine art gallery, and it's a place to exhibit more science and engineering oriented art and outreach types of activities. So we partner with groups on campus to put together exhibits that are more on that side of things. And the whole idea there is, one, to kind of let the community see some of this great stuff that's happening on campus, whether that be in geosciences or engineering or, I don't know, pick another science. Wildlife and fishery science. We got some things coming up there.
Sure.
But we want those things to be available here, but we also really want to encourage that next generation of scientists and engineers and to get excited about some things and to understand, well, what does it really mean to be a geoscientist, or what does a wildlife biologist do, or those types of things. And so we put together really visual and engaging exhibits that start in Bryan and then travel and go to underserved communities.
What's the most striking piece that you've seen there? Does anything jump into your mind?
There's just no way to even go there. We've got 7 years of art behind us right now. So I think one of the exhibits that I found the most rewarding was actually an exhibit that we did where we collaborated with some of our more traditional visual artists. We invited a handful of them to create an original piece inspired by some, this is going to get technical fast, I'm probably going to mess it up, but inspired by some core samples that were taken around the world from the ocean floor by some slides photography that was made of those core samples. And of course, they use those to study all kinds of things, but climate change and all sorts of things. But it was really interesting to see what these artists came up with and their interpretation and all the different angles that they came at. But then also we were able to couple that with actual core samples and have them there on hand. Right. And and have a more engaging experience. So that's really what we strive for, is to put together engaging experiences so people dig in a little bit more. We use some technology for that. And it was really fun. Some of the stuff that came out was a little bit wild and off in left field for me, but it's art. And so awesome. I love that. I love the creativity. And then when you bring that with science, there's always discovery there.
Fun
but
stuff.
Seed Gallery is only one piece of Advent GX.
Oh, yeah.
Though.
It's a small project, really. Advent GX, we work with entrepreneurs and communities around the world to help them form sound strategy for building vibrant economies and increasing quality of life. So strategy is a big part of this. The business incubator that we have, the Innovation Underground, is a huge part of our efforts. It's probably the thing that takes the most time. We're serving 60 entrepreneurs right now out of downtown Bryan from around the world. And actually, David's book, we adopted it when it was released as a tool that we use now to help filter the entrepreneurs. So we have a lot of entrepreneurs who come to talk to us and say, hey, can I be part of your business incubator? And naturally, they're really excited about their baby, and we want them to be excited, but we needed a way to slow down that flow. And so we now give them a copy of Think Beyond Value, Building Strategy to Win, and say, this is for you. Have a look and come back and make a presentation to us through the V-Roll framework and talk to us about your idea. And that accomplishes a couple of things. One, if an entrepreneur is not willing to take the time to do that, then great. We shouldn't be working together, because that's just, education is good for all of us. But also, we've had a few come back and say, I am not ready.
Oh.
And that's wonderful. Honestly, that's so good for an entrepreneur to realize they have more thinking to do. They have to work a little bit more on their strategy. And sometimes we take that as an opportunity to sit down and say, okay, what's on your mind? Because that could mean they're really close to something super powerful, or it could mean they've got some work to do and they need to come up with a new idea. But if an entrepreneur is willing to think things through and be critical of their own ideas and their opportunities and really think strategically about their market, that's who we want to work with. And V-Roll really encourages that activity.
I bet so.
And then, of course, you also do the Grand Stafford Theater and the Ice House.
Yeah, so those are other community projects of ours. So we have Grand Stafford Theater, Ice House on Main, Seed Gallery, Innovation Underground.
Locationally, I'm
all
sensing
of this
a
is
unifying.
In downtown Bryan, right? So we work with rural and underserved communities. So downtown Bryan becomes a place where we can bring people from around the world, a lot in Texas, but also around the world, come here, and they see what you can do with a building that maybe is falling down or has been forgotten for far too long, or what you can do with a human resource base, and to make some things happen and to start to generate economic activity, which generates better quality of life. And so we bring people here from all over the world, and they see that.
When did downtown Bryan break through?
Well, downtown Bryan is breaking through.
It's a work in progress.
It's a work in progress. I mean, it's really wonderful. It is so far past where it was 10 years ago. I think the city of Bryan, it's probably been between 15, 20 years now when the city of Bryan made the strategic decision to invest in the infrastructure. Mm-hmm. And they did such a phenomenal job.
No question.
I mean, in terms of strategically thinking through, okay, what does the city need to do to literally lay the groundwork so that entrepreneurs can come behind the city investment and generate the tax revenue that is the return on investment for the city, right? And so that has been at least 15 years when they literally tore up the streets, redid all of the infrastructure from building to building, all of the sidewalks, and they did that great master plan for the historic downtown area. But it's still all of the activity until the last 2 years, maybe 3 at the most, has been centered on that south side of downtown, right? Mm-hmm. They invested all the infrastructure all the way to the north side, all the way to Martin Luther King Boulevard where the Ice House on Main is.
Okay.
So they invested all the way, but the activity really wasn't on the north side until this last few years.
Okay.
So there's a lot more to go. There's a lot more to come. Downtown Bryan is just getting started.
That's great. Great to hear. Breaking the fourth wall for a moment, I assume you two have had some interaction with Professor Krychek.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Of course.
Right.
In fact, he has paintings in the Seed Gallery right at the
Right
moment.
now.
I was wondering if
Yes,
I was
he
wondering
does.
if that
and
was
it's
the
not
case.
the first time. So,
Right.
Yeah.
He and I have actually done a little music together. Yeah.
And he's performed at the Grand Stafford Theater.
So, what's next for you two?
Well, actually, we've got a bunch of things cooking.
We do have a lot of things cooking.
But they're mostly centered around the launch of the Value Creation Company. We've been talking about this now for over a year.
Uh-huh.
And the idea is we have people who want to be trained in VReal. They want to become certified in some way as VReal advisors so that they can go out and use this with people. So we want to be able to train people. We also want to be able to do consulting with people. We have at least 2 more book projects that are probably coming on the way. And we also are in the process of creating some online training materials as well, so that people can at least get a good initial exposure to using the VReal framework in their own contexts. Yeah. And then there's a bunch of other stuff. Take it away, Joan.
I feel like you covered that fairly well, but there is a lot going on in terms of really building a community of like-minded thinkers who understand that value creation is kind of the point, right? So when you're working in a free market, you need to make something of value for somebody else, right? There's that exchange, and that's very, very important.
Adam Smith.
There you go. Gotta love him. So there's that, but it also goes down not just from the company perspective or even the not-for-profit perspective, but all the way down to the individual perspective. And so there's a whole lot of need for people to be able to think strategically about themselves as, a bundle of resources and capabilities, if you think about that. And in the, maybe this might be considered part of the personal development space, but you have a lot of angst around that. Like, what was I made for? What's my purpose? What, is this job even really what I should be doing? Like all of this sort of angst that people have. And sometimes it's because they're having a bad day. And sometimes it's because they're not using the resources and capabilities available to them. And it's on some kind of gut level, they know that. They know that they're not fully exploiting their capabilities. And I just fundamentally believe that when you tap into what it is that you were made to do, what you're uniquely able to accomplish in the world because of your unique combination of skills and abilities and experiences and network and resources and capabilities and all of those tangible and intangible things,
right,
you find great joy and satisfaction every day because you're like, wow, I just did something. And that was useful. That was valuable. And it was powerful, even if it was just for that one person or a large audience or a small company that you're working for. There's power in that. There's in that joy. And so we want to multiply that by helping people sort of key into, okay, what is it for you?
Right. And sometimes that feeling is at its best when it goes along with a feeling of really only I could have done this, or there are maybe a few hundred people in the world who could have done this, but I was standing here on this day and met these people's needs in this particular way. And it was something that someone else, if they had just tried to step into my shoes, it's a place they would have struggled.
Right.
And instead I swung my bat and I hit the ball out of the stadium.
Right. Because you're using all of those things. But I think first you have to know what is it you have to work with. And I think people often really either they struggle to make that inventory or they feel like they're not supposed to. Like somehow that's not humble And and so, or they hesitate because they're busy and I've got to just do this thing and work in the grind and I'm just supposed to be over here. And that will just eat your lunch. Mm-hmm. It'll just take everything you've got, as opposed to really understanding, oh my gosh, I am energized in this particular way. This type of activity makes me go home happy. Where this type of activity just completely like destroys me, right? And so understanding and really looking at both the tangible, David talks about this a lot in his book, the tangible resources and capabilities, if you will, like I know how to write, right? That's fairly tangible. Not everybody knows how to do that at all, right? So I can combine my ability to write, my ability to communicate, my personal network and professional network, some various sort of intangible aspects of my lifestyle that allow me to be really flexible, all of those things. And then just now VReal is a huge part of my resource and capability set. Mm-hmm. And you combine all of those things and suddenly you find, okay, wait, I can create value for people in a way, like you said, that other people aren't going to be able to. Mm-hmm. And then I can come alongside people who can complement me. And maybe that means forming a company, or maybe that means being part of a community or whatever. So we're really excited. You can tell I'm a little excited about this opportunity that we're going to pursue. And I'm already working with David and doing some research on how we take VReal and interject it into this, for lack of a better phrase, personal development space, mm-hmm. and just help people maximize their ability to create value and really their joy.
When you're talking about sort of the Venn diagram of where someone finds their meaning, mm-hmm. what are the things that you focus on? Because the common ones are, what do I love doing? What am I good at? I think one that sometimes people miss is they'll talk about like the economics of it, mm-hmm. but you need to consider both the economic ceiling and also the economic floor. Mm-hmm. Because for many people, and I saw this every single day that I lived in Los Angeles, for an actor, for example, mm-hmm. the economic ceiling is extraordinarily high and the economic floor is below zero. It's literally below zero, because some people spend thousands of dollars a year on acting mm-hmm. lessons and never mm-hmm. get cast in anything. Mm-hmm. So, and then when my dad gives his end of year lecture, Dr. Steve Wiggins, he gives his last lecture to his economics classes. He talks about this, and he talks about those three things. And then he talks about a fourth one, which is how well does this, whatever my career or vocational pursuits are, how well does this fit into the rest of a life that I would want? And then Dr. Marcantonio also talks about ikigai, what the world needs. And so they have slightly different approaches to that question. What are the frameworks that you use to sort of help people zero in on where is my purpose?
Well, I don't know that I want to constrain that. Oh, okay. I think I want people to kind of have their own mix in that regard.
That makes sense.
But what I do want to help them think very carefully about is how they can create value in the world. Okay. Right? Very often that is a mix of value for you and for me, right? Yes. But getting them to think in that direction, I think often opens thoughts that weren't there before. You know, how am I actually creating value in my job or with a product or service or my volunteer activities or what, how do I actually create value? Mm-hmm. And then thinking about how I can do that in ways that other people can't do that. So if you want to add in various pieces along the way to help you define that, great.
Good. Plug your stuff. I mean, I don't know how we could probably talk for 10 minutes about just where our listeners can find you, but what are the most important things? What should they be looking for?
Well, they should be following Dr. David Flint on Instagram and Facebook. I'll make that face. And LinkedIn.
I'm not good at social media.
And also coming soon is valuecreationco.com. And so we are starting to tease that out right now, let people know that something is coming. And so that'll be that'll be coming out in a big way. So we're pretty excited about that.
Right now, drdavidflint.com is available, where you can find links to blog posts and the podcast.
Podcast is there. Podcast is on all the places where podcasts are. So,
right.
And then, of course, Joan Quintana. I'm on LinkedIn and Instagram and Facebook, all the things. So
yeah, I'm on LinkedIn too, right? Yes.
You are.
Okay. Yeah. I'm not good at social media. What can I tell you?
Magically. Yeah.
Let's hit a few quick rapid fire to close us out. What do you consider, each of you, your most valuable failure, as briefly as possible?
Me first?
Sure.
Believe it or not, I once, actually twice, was deeply fooled by somebody who was a great, truly con artist.
Oh.
And it taught me a lesson. I should have learned from the first time, but I definitely learned after the second time.
Okay.
And so I am a normally very trusting person, and I'm not saying I'm changing that or anything, but I have learned because of that I always have to try and understand, who am I really dealing with here?
Fair.
So I thought about this question as we were walking over here, and I'm just going to show. So big early career failure was just a lack of preparedness on my part. I was assigned the task of going off to DC to make a presentation at a big, like, global transportation conference. And I thought that it would be fine if I just wore casual clothes on the plane, because I was going to have plenty of time to go ahead and get there and change, go to the hotel before I had to actually stand in front of a bunch of people and make a professional presentation. And guess what? It just didn't work out that way. The weather was bad, and oh my gracious, it was bad. So I ended up getting there just in time to make my talk. But do you know how badly dressed I was? Like, you just have to prepare in life. You have to imagine that the worst is going to happen, be prepared for that. And I had checked my bags and they didn't make it. It was all the things went wrong. And thankfully the crowd was gracious, but I was not my most confident and prepared because I wasn't prepared. So life lesson early on, grateful for it.
I saw Shannon's eyebrows and like head nodding from the corner of my eye while you were saying that. What do you think is people's biggest misconception of you? We'll go with you first this time, Joan.
Oh, gracious. Misconception of me.
Yes.
My kids, who have worked some in some of our businesses, they tell me that I'm intimidating. Oh. And I'm so not intimidating. I mean, apparently I am. But I can be intimidating, but I just love people so much, and I go at a pretty fast clip, and I'm pretty ambitious. But I think when people sit down and have a conversation with me, they realize that it's just really about them.
My stomach is growling. I hope you can edit that out. I didn't have breakfast this morning.
Oh, good. I thought about I every now and then, like, I'll do some lip smacking stuff on my mic just to irritate Kyle. But no, we can cut anything that shows up on the.
Yeah, that's pretty funny. I think people's biggest misconception of me is that I actually understand them. You know the character Sheldon on Big Bang Theory,
yes,
who is totally unaware of what he's doing. Okay, I am Sheldon cleaned up.
He is speaking truth right now.
Okay,
this is truth. Yes.
Yeah.
All right.
I do not understand what's going on with other people. I don't.
Okay.
And so I have to be very careful about that. I actually have to ask for help. Like, what was going on there? So I'm just kind of a cleaned up Sheldon.
Super honest. Appreciate that.
Super strategic thinker.
Right.
It's just the more human side where you're just like, wait, there was some dynamic there. I'm aware there may have been a dynamic there. Yes, indeed, there was a dynamic there.
Yeah.
Let's talk about it.
Right. If you could have anyone as a mentor for one day, who would it be? You may choose a religious figure, but if you yourself are religious, it can't be someone from your own religion.
Well, I have always been, I shouldn't say always, because of course not when I was a tiny, tiny kid, but for a very long time, I have been a big fan of C.S. Lewis.
Oh.
I just thought his writing was so clear and to the point, and he was able to create such interesting stories and nonfiction as well. And if I could sit down and just have a conversation with C.S. Lewis, that would be great.
I want to come back to that.
We are both huge fans of C.S. Lewis.
Then I'll just say it now.
Yeah.
One of my favorite lines that I've ever read is when they find out that in The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, that Aslan is a lion, like a real lion. And I think Lucy asks, is he safe? And I think it's Mr. Beaver who says, safe. Of course he isn't safe, but he's good.
Yeah.
I love that.
Yeah.
I love that.
I have been able to visit the kilns where he lived and his gravesite and the pub in Oxford where he and Tolkien and Dorothy Sayers and Charles Williams would get together on Tuesday nights, I think it was. Good old C.S. Lewis.
Good choice.
Good stuff. It's hard to pick one for me. I have a lot of heroes, but I kind of knew David was going to say C.S. Lewis, so I chose a different one.
I see your hair flipping over there.
Yeah. Gotten to know him pretty well. So there's a philosopher. I think he would consider himself more a philosopher than theologian, but a bit of both. His name is Miroslav Volf, and he's out of Yale. Okay. And he wrote, he's now retired, but he wrote a lot on something called the theology of work. And I have just a real interest in this. It plays right into my interest in economics and economic development and just maximizing human potential in general. And he really speaks in his writing to, and also Dorothy Sayers, who is a contemporary of C.S. Lewis, but they both really wrote a lot about this notion that we were made to work. And what does that mean? And what are the implications of that? That work isn't something that you dread. Work is something you're excited about because you were made to do it.
Yes.
And I would sit down with him in a heartbeat and just let him tell me what else I should be reading. Like, who else should I be? So that'd be great. I would love it.
What is your fondest memory of TAMU or something that's happened around this community?
There are a lot of good memories.
Seriously.
It's part of the reason that I was willing to come back and be part of the faculty here is because I had really good memories in the doctoral program. But I've also got a lot of good memories over the last almost 11 years that I've been back as part of the faculty. I got to say, one of them, though, that's going to stick is that football game with LSU last season that went for 7 overtimes.
Whoop.
Oh, my goodness gracious. Yeah, that one's going to stick.
Have you seen the His Knee Was Down video?
No.
So floating around on Twitter is something from the 12th Man TV. It's an audio feed of the room at 12th Man TV when Kellen Mond drops back. He goes down to pick the ball up, and then he throws the interception, and somebody in the booth says, "His knee was down, huh?" And then they rule it an interception, and then the guy is going, "His knee was down. Run the replay again. Put it up on the video board, at the stadium." And they're controlling the way that the replay actually gets seen. And he's like, "Okay, rock it back." And it's clear that his knee was in fact down. And then I don't know if this made any difference in how things were actually administered, but they decide to go to review. And you know the rest. So anyway, but it's on Twitter, and it's really fun to listen. And somebody says at the end, "We're going to come back, we're going to win the game, and they're going to carry us out of the stadium on their shoulders." And that's kind of what happened. So
that was so cool.
That was a great night. It really was. I do have season tickets. I sit at the very top center of the south end zone below the big screen. And A&M football is just a hoot and a half. So
sure is.
Yeah, that so game. Oh my goodness.
Joan.
So this is going to sound a little somber, but in truth, it's just so hopeful. And it's one of the reasons I love Texas A&M and Texas Aggies. But so I think one of my most fond memories goes around bonfire. And I remember going to bonfire and taking my kids to bonfire. And then, of course, we had that tragic day when bonfire fell. And fast forward a few years, that was when I was working in the Association of Former Students, and we were writing an article about the opening of the bonfire memorial and doing a photo shoot and all of the media things. And at the time, my youngest daughter would have been maybe 4 years old. And she's now an Aggie, actually. And I took her on the photo shoot because I wanted to show in this, like, the generations and how, even though we lost this particular tradition is not going to be the same going forward. And we lost through such tragic events, right? So much loss. As you walk through Bonfire Memorial, as you walk, there's a cadence that's designed into that with those stones.
Sure.
And you're walking through, and that cadence alone that's created by your walk, and then seeing that circle that's formed by the individual monuments is such a testament to a rhythm that is going to continue forward and a spirit that continues forward. Even without that particular tradition, we remain such a powerful force in the world because we adhere to this tradition and these values that are so, so important for the world. And so I will always remember walking there, holding my 4-year-old daughter's hand and walking. We're just going to do a photo shoot. I wasn't there to visit the memorial. I'd been there before. We were doing a photo shoot. And then we got the shot of her like pointing up and her little chubby hand. And that's just, to me, I will always remember it because it's like, okay, we had pain and we had great, great loss and we have such a bright future. And I just love this place. And it's going to be true as long as we stick with those core values.
I'm going to let that sit for a second. We end each session with Good Bull. This is an opportunity to recognize someone else for something good or great they have done. Do you have someone you would like to send some Good Bull?
Well, I have a lot of people, but here at A&M, I do want to say thank you to Dr. Asghar Zardkui.
Oh.
He was my committee chair on my dissertation, and I don't know if I would have finished if it hadn't been for Asghar. Huh. He's a great friend. He's a great mentor. He's a great scholar. And he is soon to retire after many years here.
Yes.
And it won't be the same when he is no longer here.
Such a positive guy.
Mm-hmm.
He makes you feel, as a student, he makes you feel like you can get this from a very early stage.
So we just came off of Ring Weekend, of Parents Weekend, and it was a Ring Weekend when we at Texas A&M. Ring Day is a big deal, right? And I'm just going to shout out, it was a tough weekend. Weather-wise, we had some really very destructive weather in the region, and families were coming from all over the country, all over the state, of course, but even all over the country to share in this very profound tradition that is the Aggie Ring and the receipt of that. And I know how hard it was to change all the plans so that everybody would be safe despite the weather and ensure that despite all of that chaos, there would be a very special moment for families coming into town as Aggies were getting their Aggie Ring that would just go forward with them and through their careers. So shout out to the Association of Former Students for work well done. That's Good Bull.
Yes. I'd like to send some Good Bull to Matt Dennis and Dr. Beth Dormeyer, a couple of good friends. So thank you guys. Thank you both for coming. This is a really good discussion.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah. It's been fun.
Thank you so much for watching. If you would like to stay up to date on our latest videos, be sure to subscribe and hit the bell icon to receive notifications. If you're in a rush or on the road, you can still join us on iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you find your podcasts. If you want to learn more about us or our guests, please visit our website at mays.tamu.edu/podcasts. Also, please check out Mays Business School's academic programs. They're the sponsors of our show, and you can find them in the description. Thanks, and gig 'em.